But it's great to see you this morning. How many of you have had a good week? How many of you had a lousy week? You know what? That's okay. How many of you are ready to have a great Sunday? Good. Hey, I want to make sure that you're awake this morning. Sunday mornings can be very tough. And when you get up early, so I just want to make sure you're prepared. And plus, I must tell you that after training children's leaders last week, Pastor Mike said, boy, I wish I had some good children's workers. And I said, hey, I'll check and see if there's any in the sanctuary that look like they're good kids' material. So right now, would everybody stand up, please? Good. Would you do what I ask you to do, please? Would you take your right hand and put it on your nose? No, your nose, not hers. Thank you. Take your left hand, grab your right ear. Now that's position number one. Okay, put your hands down. Take your left hand, put it on your nose.
Take your right hand, grab your left ear. That's position number 2.
Okay, put your hands down. When I say 1, go to 1. When I say 2, go to 2. Here we go. Position number 1. Pretty good, except for the finger in the eye. Okay, put your hands down. Position number 2. Some of you are going, where's my face? I can't find it. Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. What? Quit it. You're slapping yourself silly. Okay. Okay, put your hands in front of you. Now, swing them out. Now, bring them back in. Curl your fingers in. Bring them in slowly. Stick your nose in the air. Bring them in a little bit farther. Get on your tiptoes. Bring them in a little bit farther. Stick your rear end out. Bring them in a little bit farther under your arm and lay an egg. Whack, whack. Okay, all right. Now, put your hands in front of you and swing them out. Oh, right in the mouth. Are you okay? Now, together, out. Together, out. Together, out. Together, out. Hey. Together, out, together, out. Thank you for the standing ovation. I appreciate that. I'll let PD know that you really cared about me this morning. Thank you. You know, 2 weeks ago, when I shared about the 4 men that carried the paralytic to Jesus, we talked about the 3 things they had of compassion, of faith, and of determination. And I will tell you that compassion is something that always grabs my heart. This year, when the year ends, I will have been in 11 countries around the world. I've seen over 50,000 kids give their life to the Lord. And while I love the mass crowds, how many of you know that God doesn't see mass crowds? God sees individuals. He sees people one-on-one. And I came across a school in Kenya called Joyland that grabbed my heart, and I could not get it out of my heart because I believed it was of the Lord. This is a school that has gone 22 years without water. It's a school that's a handicapped school, and I have vowed to them that we will build them a water well. Compassion is something that should be part of our lives. I wish I could have shared this with you 2 weeks ago, but PD told me share it this week. And I'd like you to be introduced tonight or today to Joyland. No other school like it. Watch this. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see.
It literally took my breath away.
I couldn't hold back the tears.
I felt like I had to do something.
I've never seen a school like Joyland. As children's ministry specialist for the Assemblies of God, Debbie and I started KidLink International because we believe in linking kids to Christ spiritually, emotionally, and physically. I'll never forget the time that we went into Kisumu, Kenya, going into the schools, thousands of kids and giving an altar call and seeing many kids come to the Lord, going in and doing a kids crusade in a squatter's village across from the Bible college. Over 5,000 kids, seeing over 3,000 kids give their life to the Lord. And we were touched at what God was doing. But I got a call asking if I would come and visit a school, a special school called Joyland. It's a school for the mentally and physically challenged kids. And I said, yeah, I'd love to come. And as we got to the school, Debbie and I and the kids, JJ and Sadie, we went in, waited in the hall for the children to come, and as the principal rang the bell, I wasn't ready for what was about to happen. Because all of a sudden I saw kids coming from everywhere. Some being pushed in the few wheelchairs they had. But it was the kids that came crawling in the dirt, in the grass, because they did not have wheelchairs, they didn't have crutches. To see them crawl in and to see even some of the mentally challenged people pushing those that were physically in need, and seeing these 242 kids gather in this room, and then before I got a chance to entertain for them and to speak to them, they began to sing for me, "The joy of the Lord is in my life. The joy of the Lord makes me smile." And I got to tell you that it took my wife's breath away. Sadie just couldn't control the tears. And as we watched them minister to us, I had a chance to minister back to them. But I was challenged at the fact that they need wheelchairs, they need crutches. And then to walk out over to their therapy pool and see that it was empty, no water. And I said to the principal, I said, "Arthur, why is there no water in this pool?" And he said, "Jay, we haven't had running water for 18 years. He said, "We are in desperate need of a water well." Well, I can tell you, to stand there and have my son look and say, "Dad, we've got to do something." And that's what this is all about. To realize this school that ministers the way God says to never forget the orphans, never forget them and give them what they need. You know, I'm used to the mass crowds and many people getting saved, but I believe that we also need to take care of the one or the two or the 242 that need to be touched physically. So right now, we need a water well. Not only do we need the water well, but we need also to have it set up so they have solar, because electricity is very hard to get. But to have solar and to have a 20,000 reserve water tank, and then to be able to take the piping into the bathrooms that have not had running water for 18 years. You see, we want to give them not only a spiritual touch, but we want to touch them physically. We want to be able to give them wheelchairs and crutches. But most of all, they had the living water of Jesus Christ in that school that was started many years ago by the Salvation Army. But we want to also give them physical water so that they can live and they don't have to walk 3 or 4 miles every single day to get water. Thanks for letting me share with you about one of the greatest schools I've ever seen, Joyland. Remember, we can change their life. Let's touch the future by what we do. You take a look at those kids and you see smiles on their faces. You see, they don't realize what they don't have. But I am so thankful that IES is going to partner with us. They need the water well, they need the solar system, they need the reserve water tank, they need the piping to go into the bathrooms that have not flushed, they need new toilets, their therapy pool, the kids need it desperately. And at the end of the service, there'll be an exit offering. And if you would like to partner, if you would like to invest, this is something that is important to God. These kids are orphans. Parents have literally thrown these kids away, and they're orphans, and they need our help. And so if you can partner with us today, I know it will bless them, and I just want to say thank you. Well, the story tells of a grocery clerk who was working in the produce section when a lady walks in, an elderly lady, and says, "Sir, could I buy a half a head of lettuce?" And he looks at her and says, "Ma'am, we only sell the full head of lettuce. We don't sell half." She says, "I've been shopping here for years. Can't you make an exception?" And he said, "Well, it's not up to me. It's up to my boss." "Well, talk to your boss." So he walks to the back of the store, not knowing that the lady is following him, and walks back there and says, "Hey, boss, there's some dim-witted idiot lady that wants to buy a half a head of lettuce." And the boss kind of looks funny, and the clerk turns around and sees the lady standing there, and he continues and says, "But this lovely lady would like to buy the other half." Well, the boss says to him later, "My word, you think so quick on your feet. Where did you learn to do that?" He says, "Well, as you know, I grew up in New York," and said New York is known for two things: great sports teams and ugly women. And the man got flustered, and he looked at this clerk and said, "Do you realize that my wife is from New York?" To which the clerk said, "Oh, which sports team did she play on?" You know, the power of the tongue, the power of words. This morning, I want to talk to you about the power we have in the tongue. You realize that over 150 times in the book of Proverbs, the Proverbs talks about the lips, the mouth, the tongue. You see, first of all, words are important. Do you have any idea how many words you use in the course of an ordinary day? I don't know how many of you have ever read a book by Tom Clancy. He's a fictional reader, and I will tell you that most of his books are between 500 and 700 pages. This book is thick, but it's only 400 pages. You can imagine how thick his book is. If you don't want to read a Clancy book, but you have one, you can use it as a weapon to defend yourself and kill the other person, or you can use it as a doorstop. But it is very big, and do you realize that there is between 500,000 and 750,000 words in one of his books? Researchers go on to say, do you realize they say on an average, everybody opens their mouth to speak at least 700 times a day. That's the average. And in those 700 times, they say that we speak out of there 18,000 words on the average. That's 54 printed pages. You can see that number one, words are important to us. But second, do you realize that words have power? Words have power. Your words are important because your words will either say something worthwhile or it'll say something that isn't worthwhile. There are words that come from Proverbs 18, 20, and 21, and this is what it says. From the fruit of his mouth a man's stomach is filled. With the harvest from his lips he is satisfied. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. I want you to underline in your thought that statement. The tongue has the power of life or death. Whether you know it or not, there's power of life and there's power of death in the words you speak. You see, there's power of life and there's also death within you. You see, we are giving life-giving or death-dealing in many different ways. You can be someone that deals life by the power of your tongue. You have power to heal, to comfort, to compliment, to discipline with tough love. Or you can kill, you can destroy, you can hurt, you can maim, you can assassinate. You see, we have words that give life or we have words that deal death. What deals life? Well, you know, it starts with our tongue. How many of you know that in our body, the tongue may be the smallest organ, but it is the most powerful? Now, I don't know how many of you have ever looked at other people's tongues. Most people normally don't do that. But do you realize that in this room, you're going to have all different shapes and sizes of tongues? I mean, some people have long tongues. Some people have short tongues. Some have skinny tongues. And some have fat tongues. Now that's a mouthful. But you understand that the tongue has first the power of life. You see, the power of life, what comes from power of life? First, the tongue may be used for wise counsel and sound advice. Proverbs 10:31 says, the mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom. Proverbs 15:7 says, the lips of the wise spread knowledge. What comes out of a righteous man? Wisdom. What comes out of a wise man? Knowledge. These are two things that ought to be coming out of our life all the time. Wisdom and knowledge. And folks, can I remind you that as parents, God has put us in a place to raise our children, to love them, to nurture them, to give them wisdom, to give them knowledge, not just to give them do's and don'ts. I want to remind you something, that R plus R minus R equals R. Rules and regulations without relationship leads to rebellion. Rules and regulations without relationship leads to rebellion. And God has called us to give wisdom and knowledge to our kids, to the people we work with people around us. But it's how we do it that's so important. Let's give life by giving wisdom and knowledge. Second thing is the tongue can be used to speak rebuke or reproof into somebody's life. Proverbs 27:6 says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. A better version says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. You know, it is better to have a friend to tell you the hard truth than having somebody try to butter you up and just cover it up. I've got to tell you that I've got a friend by the name of Joe Siddle. And since I've been here for 3 weeks, I will tell you that Joe Siddle and I have talked every other day. I'm his accountability partner. He's my accountability partner. And I can tell you that Joe will call me up, and sometimes I want to say, would you stay out of my business? But that's what he's there for. There are times he'll say, Jay, I heard the way you said that to somebody, and you know what? It just wasn't right. Or he'll say, you know what? There's probably a better way to do it. And he'll give me advice. He'll say, hey, how's things going? You got busy today. You didn't have your prayer life. You need to do it. And you know what? Every single time he's spoken to me, he's been right. 100% of the time. And you know what I think of Joe Siddle? He's a good friend. I love him. He's as close as a brother. And he's welcome in my home. Why? Because we need people that out of love will speak rebuke and reproof into our life. The problem is sometimes we are too thick-skinned to let someone speak into our life. And if we want to make the best out of our life, we've got to open that door. That gives life. The third thing, the tongue may be used for encouragement. Proverbs 12:25 says, an anxious heart weighs a man down, but a kind word cheers him up. The tongue that brings healing is a tree of life. A man finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is a timely word. You know, sometimes people think that that's just metaphorical speaking, but let me tell you, you talk to anybody in the professional business of healing, and they will tell you that when somebody is hospitalized, somebody's in there, that when there are people that gather around that are encouragers, they come and gather them up and they love them and they say positive things, they say good things. It's those people that heal so much quicker because they have life. But it's those who are by themselves, or they have people come in who are pessimistic, that look for the worst, that don't have encouraging words. Those are the people that have the hardest job of healing. Why? Because it brings life when you give words of encouragement. But let me tell you, we can give words of life, but we can also deal death. It has to do with the tongue. And how do we tame the tongue? Proverbs 16:1 says this, "To a man belongs the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the reply of the tongue." That verse basically means the tongue can be put under God's control. But you go into James chapter 3. It's a verse, chapter 3, verse 3, that talks about the tongue and the fact that if it's not under God's control, what happens? James chapter 3, verse 3 says this, "When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal." I don't know about you, but I grew up around horses. And when I was in second grade, we moved to Springfield, Missouri. We took 2 horses there. My dad found a farm to put it on, and one day my dad said, "Jay, would you like to ride a horse?" I had never ridden a horse in my life. So we get to the farm, and Jim Harrell comes out, and he lets me see his 18 horses. And he says, "You see the black one over there?" I said, "Yeah." Remember, I'm only 7.5. He says, "You know what the name of that black one is?"
No.
"It's Blackie."
Good name.
He said, "That's the one you're going to ride." And I watched them put a saddle on it. And I watched them bring the horse over. And I got to tell you, it honestly was like this. I see the horse start coming.
That's cool. Well, oh my word.
That thing looked like it was 18 feet tall. I looked at it, and there was muscles on the neck and on the feet. There were muscles where you didn't even know there were muscles. And all of a sudden, they saddled it, put me up on top of it, and I felt like I was 18 feet up in the air. And I said, "What do I do?" And he says, "Well, if you want it to turn right, just pull on the leather strap and pull it right. Want to turn left, pull on the leather strap left. You want it to stop, pull back."
How do I make it go?
You kick him in the ribs.
What?
I'm a 7.5-year-old. Don't worry. Don't show fear.
That's easy for you to say. And I remember sitting there, "Come on, let's go."
Boom. Oh, baby! And this thing took off. We started riding, and I pulled on the rein and went to the right. Pulled on the rein and went to the left. Finally, he was coming back. Whoa! And the thing stopped. He said, "Jay, while you're sitting still, pull back on the reins and say, 'Back, back.'"
Okay, back, back.
And that horse started walking backwards. Here, a 7.5-year-old, probably 70-pound, 60-pound weakling is telling a half-a-ton horse what to do, and it was obeying me. Why? Because I had a masterful voice? No. It's for the fact of the little piece of metal that sat in his mouth, and it's called a bridle. That bridle with that piece of metal in it, that horse was humongous, but with that little piece of metal, I could do anything I wanted to with that horse. The horse was big. The bridle was small, but it controlled his whole body. It goes on to say, take ships or boats, for example, that when you get out, you can turn a big boat with the little rudder that sits in the back of it. I was fishing in Naivasha in Kenya. Had a guy in the boat with me facing one direction. I'm facing the other. And Don, he stuttered. This was a terrible time to stutter because I'm fishing, and all of a sudden he goes, "Jay, yeah, the water is moving toward us." And I turn, and here's the head of the hippo coming right toward the boat. And man, I turned and grabbed that, and I was headed the wrong direction, but I put it into gear, whipped that steering wheel, and that boat just turned on a dime and took off. And I thought, man, if I could not have turned that, we would have been in trouble. It was a boat, but the little piece of metal in the back controlled the whole thing. It's small, but it controlled the whole boat. And the Bible goes on to say this. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. It says just the spark can set the whole forest on fire. You know, when I was in 4th grade, I'll never forget a summer holiday season. It had not rained, almost like Indonesia, but it had not rained for over almost 3 months. The grass was dry as could be, and one day a friend and I, in his house, grabbed boxes of matches because we had nothing else to do. And we walked out into a field that was a 1/4 mile by a 1/4 mile of grass that stood about that tall. And he said, hey, I got an idea. And he lit a match, and then he threw it down into the grass, and the grass began to burn, and he stomped it out. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to try it. So I grabbed a match, I lit it, I did the same thing, and we would let it grow, and we'd stomp it out. We kept going back and forth, and finally, Brett said, you can't outdo me. And he lit another match, just a little flame, and he threw it down into the grass. And when he did, I can tell you that it began to burn. It got to about 7 feet, and he waited until it got to about 8 feet to 9 feet, and then he started stomping and stomping. His pant leg catches on fire. I jump on top of him, get it out, and we turn back around, and the flames are shooting everywhere. So we did the smartest thing 2 4th grade boys could do. I threw my matches down. He got on his bike. I got on my bike. I said, I'm going home. He said, so am I. I said, don't say a word. You either. And I rode all the way home, and I kept looking back those 2 kilometers that I'm riding my bike, and I see smoke billowing in the sky. And when I get home, I throw my bike down, I walk in the house, and my dad is asleep on the couch. And I'm thinking, thank God. And I get in the hall, and I start to walk, and I heard, Jay,
Oh, hi, Dad.
where you been?
I've been playing with Brett
Where you been playing?
in a field,
What have you been playing with?
some sticks.
Were they matches and you set you set the field on fire?
Why do you ask?
Because Brett's dad called and said you and Brett set it on fire.
Well, since you know, yes, I did.
He said, get in the car, we're going back over there. And when we got back over there, the entire field was on fire. There was a fire engine at the north end, the south end. People were out in their backyards with their water hoses trying to keep the flames from burning their houses. And I got to tell you, it took 2.5 hours to finally get it out. The only thing that got burnt that evening was my rear end when my dad spanked me. But my dad said to me later, Jay, I've told you over and over again, don't you understand that what a little flame can do, you burn down a whole field. And the Bible says that our tongue, it's like a spark. We don't realize that what comes out may not be life-giving, but it's death-dealing by what we say to others, by what we do. When I was a younger person in college, I actually had done a study. And the study I did was dealing with eggs. And it was interesting, if you've ever looked up and learned how eggs are made and everything about them, it's interesting that when you look at them, if you put it under a microscope, it's got a porous shell. But the other thing you'll find little tiny cracks all the way through it. But the other thing is that when it's created, in the round end of it is a pocket of oxygen. The exact amount that bird or chick needs to come to maturity. And on the inside, I don't know how many of you have ever peeled a boiled egg, but you pull off almost like a plastic sheath that's there. And that's in there for the fact that if an egg gets cracked as long as it doesn't break all the way through. Because the minute it breaks all the way through, that chick or bird, because of the pollutants, the extra gases, it will not be born. It will not come to maturity. A mother bird, when she sees a crack in a shell, she doesn't kick it out, but she literally will take it with her beak and turn it so that the crack is in a different position and she can still sit on it and bring it to maturity and give it warmth. And folks, do you realize that each one of us are like an egg? Each one of us, that if they were to put us under a microscope, that you would find cracks in all of our lives. Certain areas that if people began to peck away or push or say things, that it could break into the shell of our life and the confidence of life could drain out. I'll never forget being a grade 7, being a football player, walking with the other athletes, and we had one kid who was a bully. He loved to say things that destroyed people. And we're walking along down the hall, and I'll never forget as a young lady by the name of Diane is walking the other direction, and I see Jeff go, "Watch this." And he stops and says, "Hey, Diane." And she goes, "Oh, hi." And Diane had acne. She had pimples on her face. And Jeff looked at this young lady that probably had cracks that you couldn't see, and he looked at her and said, "Oh, Diane, how are you?" "Fine." "What's all over your face?" "My word, you've got so many pimples, I can't even see your smile. You're the ugliest thing I've ever seen." And Diane dropped her books, and she ran out of the school. And she never came back. I saw her 3 years later in a different high school I was at. And I said to Diane, "Diane, why did you leave?" And she said, "Jay, you don't understand what that did to me. I thought I was the ugliest person in the world." You see, her life, her confidence was cracked. Her shell was cracked. I'll never forget, again, as a boy playing baseball and needing one more player on the team, and my coach said, "Do you know of anybody?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got a kid, Mike, that lives down the street. Has he ever played?" "I don't know." So I asked Mike, "Well, I've never really played." "Well, come on." And he began to do pretty good. We get into the game, last inning. The other team's got somebody on second base, 2 outs. I'm playing center field, and the ball is hit to right field. And I go running over to get it, and Mike says, I got it. And as he reaches up, the ball hits the edge of his glove and drops to the ground. And he picks it up, and he throws it in, and by the time he threw it in, the run had scored, and the game was over. He looked at me, and I said, "It's okay." But our second baseman, Joe, he throws his glove on the ground, takes his hat off and throws it on the ground. And he looks at him and he says, "Mike, you dropped the ball. You made us lose. You are the worst player I have ever seen." And all of a sudden, all of his confidence began to drain out. All of a sudden, he dropped his glove. He walked to my car, and he never picked up his glove again. Why? Because of death-dealing words. You know, there are times that we may not do it on purpose, but there are times you may see somebody, and you may be kidding, and you may walk up even to a coworker or somebody. You might say, "Hey, you need to get surgery on those ears. You got Dumbo ears." And everybody may laugh. When that person walks by and walks back, he may have laughed, but inside he realizes he may look pretty funny. And we may not realize that the words we say, the actions we do, when we are under pressure, when we work with people, when we have bosses or we have people around us and we come out sharp against them, what we are doing of not being person, of saying something out of love and out of respect. But it's the words that come out. We destroy them. I remember an egg that was perfect in almost every way. In fact, when you put this egg under the microscope, you didn't see many cracks. The reason I know so much about this egg is because it was my sister. You see, when I was 4 years old, we moved to the town of Buffalo, New York. And my sister in kindergarten, at first grade, top grades. She didn't know a stranger. She could walk up to any of you and go,
Oh, hi, my name's Jeannie. What's your name?
she loved people. My two brothers, it was kind of like, oh, a new school. We got to meet new people. Jeannie was, oh, yeah, I get to meet new people. And so she goes into the second grade class. My dad introduces her to the teacher, Mrs. Smith. And my sister stands there, and my dad leaves. My sister turns and says, Mrs. Smith, where would you like me to sit? You know, Mrs. Smith did something different. I don't agree with it. But she would put the smartest kid in her class in the first seat, and who she thought was the next smartest, next, until she worked her way back to who she thought was the dumbest. And in the very back of her room, she had a chair, and hanging on the front of the desk was the letter S. It did not stand for smart. It stood for stupid. And whoever acted up in her class, or whoever had the lowest grade, she thought, if I embarrass them enough, they will change. And when my sister said, where would you like me to sit? She said, Jeannie, I've had 2 new students already this week. There's only 1 seat left, the last one right over there. And so my sister went and sat down in the stupid seat. She didn't know what it stood for. She's sitting there when all of a sudden the kid says, hey, look at the stupid girl. Hey, look at Jeannie Dummy. Go out to recess. 2 girls run up. Oh, we know who you are. You're the new stupid girl. At lunchtime, the teacher walks in with the kids pounding on the desk saying, Jeannie, stupid. Jeannie, stupid. And my sister had her head on her desk sobbing because she didn't understand why she was stupid. And you know what? Her shell was cracked. And what happened that day, the nickname she got, began to affect her. The girl who made top grades were now making C, D's, and F's, and she failed that year. She had to take second grade over again. But the next year, there were 2 second grade classes. She didn't have to have Mrs. Smith. She got the new teacher who saw the best in every situation. Jeannie took her first spelling test. She missed 8. But the teacher wrote on it, +2. You got 2 right. Good job. Next week, you're going to get 3 right. She began to work with her, began to build her self-confidence, and things seemed to be going better. But halfway during the year, my sister went to the principal's office to turn papers in, and on the way back, Mrs. Smith was out scolding one of the kids and turned and saw my sister and said, Jeannie Risner, is that you? Yes. Come into my classroom. And my sister walked in, and the teacher began to scold the kids and tell them how stupid, how dumb they were. Folks, can I remind you that I've heard kids say, you know what, when my friends and I say things to each other, we know when we're kidding, but when an adult says something, we know it's true. And all of a sudden, this teacher said, you're stupid, you're dumb, and if I could put you all in that seat, I would do it. And I want to show you the girl who sat in this seat last year. And if any of you sit in there today, this is what will happen to you. And she turned to my sister and said, hold out your hands. And my sister held out her hands. And the teacher pulled out a ruler out of her desk and began to smack her across the hands. My sister went home that day with swollen hands. But all she knew was that she was a failure. She wasn't worth anything. I've got to tell you that what happened affected my sister through elementary into high school. Her favorite words were, "I can't do it. I can't do it." But you know what? It looked like my sister was someone to realize that all the king's horses and all the king's men would never be able to put her shell back together again. But she went to a camp for youth. And it was at that camp that the speaker began to speak and say, "Do you understand, young people, that God has a plan for every single one of you? You're not born by accident. If you've heard lies that you were born by accident, that's a lie, because God doesn't do anything by accident. And God has a plan." And as he began to speak, God began to grab her heart. And it was that day she said, "God, I don't know how you'll do it, but I do believe you've got a plan for me." And that night, she came home saying, "I am somebody. God's got a plan for me." And I've got to tell you, God began to turn her life around. The next year, she went to Bible college, met her future husband. They got married. And after a few years, she has the same disease I have. I have diabetes. I live with an insulin pump, because without insulin, I would die. And back then, they didn't know how to really work it well. And they said, "Jeannie, you've got diabetes. Don't get pregnant, because it may cause the baby to be deformed or something." She got pregnant and one day went into insulin shock. She almost died, but she lost the baby. And I remember just thinking, "Oh God, her shell, it's going to be so cracked again." And I remember calling her and saying, "Jeannie, are you okay?" And she said, "Yes. Jay, I hurt, but I know it's okay, because I know where my baby is today." And she said, "The other thing is this: God doesn't let something happen without a reason. And He has promised me that someday He will give me a healthy child." Can I tell you today that I have 2 healthy nieces that both have 3 kids each. And my sister and brother-in-law, they're missionaries. And my sister loved people, but I can tell you that her life was almost destroyed. It was almost ruined. It almost was shattered because of death-dealing words from the tongue. You see, God says, why is it that we can praise the Lord with the tongue that we curse others with? It should not be. And folks, may I remind you, whether it's towards your kids, your spouse, your parents, your workers, you own your own business, but the workers underneath you, God has put you in a position to be a person to give life-dealing words. Yes, there are times you've got to give the truth, but you can do it in love. And my question comes to you is this: if you're holding an egg in your hand, you hold people's life in your hand, are you an egg dropper or are you an egg carrier? When you see somebody that has a crack in their life, do you peck at it more and point out the flaws? Are you someone that turns it and you put your hand and say, "I'm going to do whatever I can to bring you to maturity"? Whether it's with our kids, and I've got to tell you, we live in a society where it's top grades, top grades, top grades, and we say the end justifies the means. No, it does not. Well, that's our culture. Folks, can I tell you that I believe in culture, but when culture goes against God's word, it's wrong. Our kids, yes, they need to be disciplined. They need to be put in line, but they need to hear how much we love them, how much we care for them, how much we appreciate them. We are either an egg carrier or we're an egg dropper. And today, my prayer is that you will be an aid carrier and you will change your family, your work, your community because of what you do.